What would you do if your own daughter told you that you smell like death, just as you received medical news that would change everything? Would you defend yourself? Would you explain the truth? Would you let her continue believing the worst? Well, when Linda finished her cruel speech about my death smell, I didn't have to wonder anymore. The doctor's report in my hands was about to teach her the difference between assumptions and reality. The morning air was crisp and clean when I stepped out of my car in Linda's driveway. But I could already sense that this visit wasn't going to be the pleasant family gathering I'd been hoping for. Something in the way my daughter had called me the night before, her voice tight with what sounded like reluctant obligation rather than genuine affection, had warned me that trouble was brewing. I'd driven the 45 minutes to Linda's house because she'd asked me to come for Sunday brunch, something we used to do regularly before my recent illness had disrupted our family routines. For 6 weeks, I'd been recovering from what everyone assumed was a serious decline in my health, and this was my first social visit since I'd started feeling better. Linda opened the front door before I could knock, and the expression on her face immediately told me that this wasn't going to be the warm welcome I'd been expecting. Instead of the usual smile and hug, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was a problem she needed to solve, rather than a mother she was happy to see. "Mom," she said, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard from her before, a mixture of impatience, disgust, and something that sounded almost like pity. "We need to talk. We need to talk." Those 4 words, delivered in that particular tone, have never preceded a conversation that anyone wants to have. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful despite the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. "Is everything all right?" Instead of answering my question, Linda stepped back from the doorway and gestured for me to come inside, but she maintained a distance between us that felt deliberate and uncomfortable. As I walked past her into the foyer, I noticed something I'd never experienced before in my daughter's home. She seemed to be avoiding getting too close to me. "Linda," I said, turning to face her as she closed the front door. "Is something wrong? You seem upset." That's when she said it. The words that would have been shocking coming from a stranger, but were absolutely devastating coming from my own child. "Mom, you smell like death." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, as if her statement had created a force that pushed me away from her. "What did you say?" I asked, certain I must have misheard her. "You smell like death," she repeated, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "Literally, like something that's already started rotting. And frankly, Mom, you look like it too." I stood in my daughter's foyer, trying to process what she just said to me. My own child, the little girl I'd carried in my body, nursed at my breast, comforted through nightmares, celebrated through achievements, had just told me that I smelled and looked like something rotting. "Linda," I started, but she held up her hand to stop me. "Mom, please don't try to deny it or make excuses," she said, her voice carrying the impatient tone of someone who'd clearly prepared for this conversation and didn't want to be derailed by objections. "I've been noticing it for weeks, but I kept hoping it would improve. It hasn't. If anything, it's gotten worse." For weeks. She'd been thinking this about me for weeks, and instead of talking to me about her concerns or trying to help me address whatever problem she thought existed, she'd been silently judging me and building up resentment. "What exactly do you think you smell?" I asked, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling in my chest. "It's hard to describe," she said, wrinkling her nose, as if the conversation itself was triggering the offensive odor. "It's sweet and sour at the same time. Chemical, but also organic. Like something that's dying from the inside out. Something that's dying from the inside out." My daughter thought I was literally decomposing while still alive. "And you think the smell is coming from me?" I asked. "Mom, I know it's coming from you," she said, her voice taking on an edge of exasperation. "It's not your house. It's not your clothes. It's not your car. It's you. Your body is producing this smell." But here's what Linda didn't know about the smell she thought she was detecting. Here's what she couldn't see as she stood there in her foyer, delivering this devastating assessment of my physical condition. For the past 6 weeks, I'd been undergoing an intensive medical treatment that had indeed changed how my body processed certain chemicals. The treatment had been difficult, uncomfortable, and had required me to take medications that could indeed affect body chemistry in ways that might be noticeable to people with sensitive noses. But the smell she thought indicated death was actually a sign of healing. The chemical changes she was detecting were evidence that my body was winning a battle, not losing one. Linda, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out the envelope I'd been carrying since my doctor's appointment 3 days earlier. There's something you should know about my recent health situation. Mom, please, she said, her voice taking on that exhausted tone that people use when they think someone is about to make excuses for inexcusable behavior. I don't want to hear about your vitamins or your home remedies or whatever alternative medicine thing you think is going to fix this. This isn't about vitamins or home remedies, I said, holding up the envelope. This is about a medical treatment that I've been undergoing for the past 6 weeks. What kind of medical treatment? She asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe I'd been receiving any legitimate medical care. Treatment for cancer, I said quietly. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in Linda's living room. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, something that might have been horror. Cancer? She whispered. Pancreatic cancer, I said. Stage 2. I've been receiving chemotherapy for 6 weeks. But you never told me, she stammered. You never said you were sick. I didn't tell you because I wanted to wait until I had definitive news about how the treatment was working, I explained. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily if the treatment wasn't going to be successful. And? She asked, her voice barely audible. I opened the envelope and pulled out the medical report that Dr. Peterson had given me 3 days earlier. The report that contained news so good I'd been waiting for the right moment to share it with my family. And according to this report, I said, the chemotherapy has been completely successful. The cancer is gone. I'm in complete remission. But here's where the conversation took a turn that revealed something much more troubling than my daughter's insensitive comments about my smell. Here's where I learned that Linda's reaction to my cancer diagnosis and treatment wasn't relief or concern, but something much more complex and disturbing. You had cancer, and you didn't tell me, she asked, and her voice wasn't filled with worry or compassion. It was filled with anger. I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect you from worrying about something that might not have been as serious as it initially appeared, I said. That wasn't your decision to make, she said, her voice rising with each word. I had a right to know that my mother had cancer. I had a right to be involved in your medical decisions. You had a right to be involved in my medical decisions. My adult daughter thought she had a right to control my healthcare choices. Linda, I'm a competent adult, I said firmly. I have the right to make my own medical decisions and choose who I share that information with. But you're my mother, she protested. Your health affects me. Your medical condition affects my life. Your medical condition affects my life. Not I was worried about you, or I wish I could have supported you, or I'm sorry you had to go through that alone. Her primary concern was about how my cancer diagnosis might have affected her life. But wait, because the revelation about Linda's true priorities was just beginning, the insight into her character that was about to unfold would be far more shocking than anything about my health condition. Linda, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I understand that you might have wanted to know about my diagnosis, but I made the decision that I thought was best for everyone involved. Best for everyone? She asked, her voice sharp with accusation. Or best for you? What do you mean? I mean that you made a selfish decision to keep us out of your medical situation, because you didn't want to deal with our opinions and our input, she said, her anger building with each word. You think my decision to handle my cancer treatment privately was selfish? I asked, genuinely bewildered by her interpretation of my choices. I think your decision to lie to your family about having cancer was selfish, she corrected. I think your decision to go through chemotherapy without telling us was selfish. I think your decision to let us worry about your strange behavior and your weird smells without explaining what was really going on was incredibly selfish. Let them worry about my strange behavior and weird smells. She was angry that I'd made her uncomfortable without providing an explanation that would have made her feel better about being uncomfortable. Linda, what strange behavior are you talking about? I asked. You've been distant and distracted for weeks, she said, as if I should have been obvious. You've been canceling plans, avoiding family gatherings, making excuses not to spend time with us. We thought you were depressed or having some kind of mental health crisis. I was recovering from chemotherapy, I said. I was tired and nauseous and needed time to rest between treatments. But you didn't tell us that, she said. You just disappeared from our lives without any explanation." "I didn't disappear from your lives," I protested. "I told you I wasn't feeling well and needed some time to recover." "You told us you had a stomach bug," she said accusingly. "You told us you were dealing with some digestive issues. You made it sound like it was something minor and temporary." "Because I hoped it would be temporary," I said. "Because I hoped the treatment would work quickly and I could return to normal activities without having to put the family through the stress of a cancer diagnosis." But here's where Linda revealed the true nature of her anger. Here's where she showed me what was really bothering her about my medical privacy. "Do you have any idea what the past 6 weeks have been like for me?" she demanded. For her, not for me, going through cancer treatment alone. For her, worrying about why I was behaving differently. "Tell me," I said, genuinely wanting to understand her perspective. "I've been worried sick about you," she said. "I've been lying awake at night, wondering if you were developing dementia or depression, or some other serious mental health issue. I've been researching elderly care facilities and trying to figure out how to approach you about getting professional help." Elderly care facilities. While I was fighting cancer, my daughter had been researching ways to institutionalize me because she thought I was losing my mental faculties. "You've been researching care facilities?" I asked. "I've been trying to be a responsible daughter," she said defensively. "I've been trying to figure out how to help you when you were clearly declining but wouldn't admit it or accept help. And it never occurred to you to simply ask me directly what was wrong." "I did ask you," she protested, multiple times. "And you kept telling me it was just a stomach bug or digestive issues or that you were tired. Because that's what I was comfortable sharing at the time," I said. "But that wasn't the truth," she said. "It was part of the truth," I corrected. "Chemotherapy does cause digestive issues and fatigue. I wasn't lying to you, Linda. I was sharing what I was comfortable sharing while I dealt with a serious medical situation." But here's where the conversation revealed something even more disturbing about my daughter's priorities. Here's where I learned that her concern about my health was really concern about something else entirely. "Mom," she said, her voice taking on a different tone, "do you understand what it would have meant if you had died without telling us you had cancer? What would it have meant? It would have meant that we missed our chance to say goodbye," she said. "It would have meant that we didn't get to spend your final months together. It would have meant that we didn't get to help you through your treatment." These all sounded like reasonable concerns from a loving daughter. But there was something in her tone that suggested there was more to her worry than just missing emotional opportunities. "But it also would have meant," she continued, "that we didn't get to help you make decisions about your care. It would have meant that we didn't get to be involved in discussions about your treatment options. It would have meant that you could have made decisions about your medical care that we wouldn't have agreed with. Decisions about my medical care that they wouldn't have agreed with." There it was. Linda wasn't angry that I'd kept my cancer diagnosis private because she'd missed the opportunity to support me emotionally. She was angry because she'd missed the opportunity to control my medical decisions. "What kind of decisions are you worried I might have made?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "That's the point. You could have chosen to refuse treatment. You could have decided to try some alternative medicine approach. You could have made choices about your care that weren't in your best interests. And you think you should have had input into those decisions? I think your family should have been consulted about major medical decisions," she said. "I think people who love you and care about you should have a voice in choices that could affect your life and your future. People who love me and care about me should have a voice in choices about my life and my future." My daughter thought that her love for me gave her the right to control my medical decisions. "Linda," I said, my voice taking on a firmness that seemed to surprise her, "I am a competent adult who is fully capable of making my own medical decisions. I don't need anyone's permission or approval to choose my own health care." "But what if you had made the wrong choice?" she asked. "Then it would have been my wrong choice to make," I said. "Just like this was my right choice to make." "But the smell," she said, apparently realizing that her original complaint now seemed petty in light of what she'd learned. "The smell that I noticed, what was that about?" "The smell you detected was probably a combination of the medications I was taking and the way my body was processing the chemotherapy drugs," I explained. "It's a known side effect of cancer treatment that some people develop a distinctive odor." "So you knew why you smelled different," she said. "Yes, I knew why. And you let me think that you were dying or decomposing or something terrible. I let you draw your own conclusions," I said, "because I wasn't ready to share my medical information with you." That's cruel, she said. What's cruel? I said. My patience finally reaching its limit is telling your mother that she smells like death instead of asking her with love and concern if there's something wrong that you can help with. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. The insight into Linda's character that would complete my understanding of why she was really angry about my medical privacy. Linda, I said, I need to understand something. When you thought I was dying or decomposing, what were you planning to do about it?
What do you mean? I mean, if you really thought I was in such serious decline that I smelled like death, what was your plan for helping me?
Linda looked uncomfortable, like I'd asked her a question. She didn't want to answer. I was trying to figure out the best way to approach you about getting medical help. What kind of medical help? I thought you might need to see a doctor for a complete physical, she said. I thought you might need some kind of intervention if you weren't taking care of yourself properly. And if I had refused to see a doctor, then I would have had to consider other options, she said, her voice becoming defensive. What other options? The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know about where Linda's mind had been heading during my weeks of chemotherapy recovery. I was researching what it takes to get someone declared mentally incompetent, she said finally. I was looking into the legal process for getting guardianship over someone who isn't capable of making good decisions about their own care. Getting someone declared mentally incompetent. Getting guardianship. While I was fighting cancer, my daughter had been researching how to take away my legal rights because I smelled different and was acting tired. You were going to try to have me declared incompetent because you thought I smelled bad? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I was researching options for helping someone who seemed to be in serious decline but wouldn't admit it or accept help, she said defensively, without ever asking me directly what was wrong. Without ever considering that there might be a medical explanation for the changes you were observing. Without ever giving me the benefit of the doubt, or assuming that I might be handling a situation that you didn't understand. Mom, you have to understand how it looked from my perspective, she said. You were acting strangely. You smelled different. You were avoiding family gatherings. You looked tired and pale. All of those things together suggested that something was seriously wrong. And your conclusion was that I was mentally incompetent rather than physically ill? I didn't know what to think, she said. You weren't giving me any information to work with. Because I wasn't required to give you information to work with, I said firmly. Because my medical information is private and personal, and I get to decide when and with whom I share it. But here's where I learned the most disturbing truth about Linda's motivations. Here's where she revealed what was really driving her concern about my condition. Mom, she said, there's something else you should know about the past 6 weeks. What's that? I wasn't the only one who was worried about you, she said. Tom and I have been talking to Susan and Michael about the situation. Tom was Linda's husband, Susan was my middle daughter, and Michael was my youngest son. Linda had been discussing my medical situation with my other children, without my knowledge or consent. You've been talking to your siblings about me? We've all been concerned, she said. We've all noticed the changes in your behavior and your appearance. We've all been worried about what was happening to you. And what conclusion did you all reach? We decided that we needed to have a family intervention, she said. We decided that we needed to confront you about your condition and insist that you get professional help. A family intervention. While I was quietly recovering from cancer treatment, my children had been planning to ambush me with accusations of incompetence and demands that I submit to their idea of appropriate medical care. When was this intervention supposed to happen? I asked. Actually, she said, looking embarrassed for the first time since I'd arrived. It was supposed to happen today. Today, I'd been invited to Sunday brunch so that my children could stage an intervention about my suspected mental decline. Where are Susan and Michael now? I asked, looking around the house as if I expected them to emerge from hiding places. They're not coming, Linda said. I called them this morning and told them I wanted to talk to you alone first. To tell me that I smell like death? To try to get you to admit that there was a problem and agree to get help before we had to involve everyone else. Before they had to involve everyone else. Linda had been appointed as the advanced scout for a family intervention designed to force me into medical care for a condition I didn't have while I was actually recovering from successful cancer treatment. Linda, I said, do you understand what you've just told me? What do you mean? You've told me that while I was going through chemotherapy for cancer, you and your siblings were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent because you couldn't be bothered to ask me directly what was wrong. That's not fair, she protested. We were trying to help you. You were trying to control me, I corrected. You were trying to override my autonomy and my medical privacy because my behavior was making you uncomfortable. We were worried about you, she insisted. You were worried about yourselves, I said. You were worried about having to deal with a mother who might be developing dementia or mental illness. You were worried about the inconvenience and the responsibility. That's not true, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain to me why your first response to my changed behavior was to research guardianship and incompetency proceedings rather than to simply ask me with love and concern if there was anything wrong that you could help with. She couldn't explain it because there was no explanation that didn't reveal the truth about her motivations. But here's where I had to make a decision about how to handle this revelation. Here's where I had to choose between using Linda's embarrassment to punish her or using it to teach her something important about respect and trust in family relationships. Linda, I said, I want you to understand something very important about what's happened here. What's that? You've shown me that you don't trust my judgment, you don't respect my privacy, and you don't believe I'm capable of managing my own medical care. Mom, that's not. And you've shown me that when you're worried about someone, your instinct is to try to control them rather than to support them. I was trying to support you, she protested. You were trying to force me into a medical evaluation because you thought I smelled bad, I said. That's not support, Linda. That's control. But the most important lesson was still coming. The education about trust and respect that would determine the future of our relationship. Linda, I said, sitting down in her living room chair and gesturing for her to sit across from me. I think we need to talk about what this experience has revealed about our relationship. What do you mean? She asked, settling reluctantly into the chair facing mine. I mean that this morning you greeted me by telling me that I smell like death, I said. You told me that I look like something that's rotting. You treated me with disgust and contempt rather than love and concern. I was worried about you, she said weakly. No, you weren't worried about me, I corrected. You were disgusted by me. You were embarrassed by me. You were treating me like a problem that needed to be solved rather than a person who might need support. That's not fair. What's not fair, I said, is spending 6 weeks recovering from cancer treatment and then being told by my own daughter that I smell like death. But I didn't know you had cancer, she protested. That's exactly my point, I said. You didn't know what was wrong, but instead of approaching me with love and offering help, you approached me with judgment and demanded answers. I was trying to help, she insisted. Were you? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were trying to solve a problem that was making you uncomfortable without caring about whether your solution was what I wanted or needed. Linda was quiet for a long moment, apparently beginning to understand the implications of what I was saying. Mom, she said finally, what should I have done differently? You should have come to me with love instead of judgment, I said. You should have said, Mom, I've noticed some changes and I'm concerned about you. Is there anything wrong? Is there anything I can do to help? And if you had said you didn't want to talk about it, then you should have respected that, I said. You should have let me know that you were available if I needed support. And then you should have trusted me to handle my own medical situation. But what if you really had been developing dementia or mental illness? She asked. What if you really had been in decline and unable to recognize it? Then you should have documented specific concerning behaviors and consulted with medical professionals about the appropriate way to get me evaluated, I said. Not researched how to have me declared incompetent because you didn't like the way I smelled. I wasn't trying to have you declared incompetent because of how you smelled, she protested. You were researching guardianship procedures because I smelled different, looked tired, and was avoiding social gatherings, I said. None of those things constitute evidence of mental incompetence. But taken together, they suggested that something was seriously wrong. Yes, they did, I agreed. They suggested that something was wrong and that I might need support and understanding from my family. They didn't suggest that I was incapable of making my own decisions. But here's where I needed to address the most painful aspect of this entire situation. Here's where I needed to confront Linda about the damage she'd done to our relationship. Linda, I said, do you understand that you've fundamentally changed how I feel about our relationship? What do you mean? I mean that now I know that when you're worried about me, your instinct is to try to control me rather than support me, I said. I know that you don't trust my judgment or respect my privacy. I know that you're willing to research legal ways to override my autonomy without even talking to me about your concerns. Mom, I was scared, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I was scared that something terrible was happening to you and you weren't telling me about it. And you were right, I said. Something terrible was happening to me. I had cancer, but instead of creating an environment where I felt safe sharing that information with you, you created an environment where I felt like I needed to protect myself from your judgment and your attempts to control my medical decisions. I never wanted you to feel like you had to protect yourself from me, she said quietly. But that's exactly what happened, I said. When I was going through the scariest medical experience of my life, I felt like I couldn't trust my own daughter with that information, because I was afraid you'd try to take over my medical care. Why would you be afraid of that? Because you've just proven that my fears were justified, I said. Because you've just told me that you were researching how to have me declared incompetent and override my medical autonomy. Linda was crying now, finally beginning to understand the full impact of her actions. How do I fix this? She asked. How do I prove to you that you can trust me? You start by acknowledging what you did wrong, I said. Not just that you made a mistake, but specifically what was wrong about your approach and why it was harmful. I should have talked to you directly instead of making assumptions, she said slowly. And that, I should have offered support instead of trying to take control. And I should have respected your privacy and your right to make your own medical decisions. And I should have trusted your judgment instead of assuming you were incompetent. That's right, I said. But there's one more thing you need to understand.
What's that?
You need to understand that the way you treated me this morning, telling me I smell like death, looking at me with disgust, approaching me with judgment instead of love, that caused damage to our relationship that's going to take time and effort to repair.
I know,
she said, her voice thick with regret. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. Being sorry is a start, I said. But sorry isn't enough to rebuild trust. You're going to have to prove that you've learned something from this experience. How do I do that? You start by changing how you approach me when you have concerns, I said. You start by treating me like a competent adult, whose judgment you respect. You start by offering support instead of trying to take control. But here's where I needed to address the most important lesson of all. The understanding that would determine whether Linda learned anything meaningful from this experience. There's something else you need to understand, I said, about why I chose to go through cancer treatment without telling you. Tell me. I chose to handle my cancer diagnosis privately because I wanted to maintain my autonomy and my dignity, I said. I wanted to make my own decisions about my treatment without having to justify those decisions to anyone else. Even your family? Especially my family, I said. Because families are often the people who are most likely to try to override your autonomy in the name of love and concern. Is that what you think we would have done? It's exactly what you just told me you were planning to do, I said. You were planning to stage an intervention to force me into medical care for a condition you thought I had, without ever asking me what I wanted or needed. We thought you weren't capable of making good decisions for yourself. Based on what evidence? I asked. Based on the fact that I smelled different and looked tired? Based on the fact that you seemed to be in decline and weren't doing anything about it? I was doing something about it, I said. I was receiving medical treatment. You just didn't know about it because I chose not to share that information with you. But why? She asked. Why wouldn't you want your family's support during cancer treatment? And that's when I delivered the lesson that would either transform Linda's understanding of family relationships or confirm that she hadn't learned anything from this experience at all. Linda, I said, I want you to imagine that you received a cancer diagnosis tomorrow.
Okay, she said uncertainly.
I want you to imagine that you decided to handle your treatment privately while you figured out the best approach for your situation. I continued. All right. And I want you to imagine that during your recovery from chemotherapy, I came to your house and told you that you smell like death and look like something that's rotting. Linda's face went pale as she began to understand the parallel I was drawing. Mom, and then I want you to imagine that I told you I'd been researching how to have you declared mentally incompetent because I didn't like the way you were handling your medical situation. I would be devastated, she said quietly. And how would that affect your trust in our relationship? I asked. It would destroy it, she admitted. That's exactly what you've done to me, I said. You've shown me that when I'm vulnerable and dealing with a serious medical situation, your response is to judge me, control me, and threaten my autonomy. I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter what you meant to do, I interrupted gently. What matters is what you actually did. And what you did was approach me with cruelty and contempt when I needed love and support. Linda was crying harder now, finally understanding the full impact of her behavior. How do I earn your trust back? She asked. You start by changing your fundamental approach to our relationship, I said. You start by treating me like an equal, rather than someone you need to manage. What does that look like? It looks like respecting my privacy even when you're curious about my personal business, I said. It looks like offering support without trying to take control. It looks like trusting my judgment even when you disagree with my decisions. What if I'm genuinely concerned about your well-being? Then you express your concern respectfully, and you accept my response, I said. You don't research legal ways to override my autonomy. You don't stage interventions to force me into medical care. You don't threaten my independence because you don't like my choices. But what if you're really making bad decisions that could harm you? Then you express your concerns once, you offer your support, and you respect my right to make my own mistakes, I said. Because that's what competent adults do for each other. Even family members, especially family members, I said. Because family relationships should be based on love and respect, not control and manipulation. But here's where I needed to address the broader implications of what had happened. Here's where I needed to help Linda understand how her behavior fit into larger patterns of how families treat aging relatives. Linda, I said, what you've done to me is part of a much bigger problem in how families treat elderly relatives. What do you mean? I mean that families often assume that reaching a certain age automatically makes someone incompetent or incapable of making good decisions, I said. They assume that being elderly means being helpless, confused, or in need of management. I don't think of you as elderly or helpless, she protested. Don't you? I asked. Because this morning you told me I smell like death and suggested that I'm not taking proper care of myself. You've been researching how to have me declared incompetent. You've been planning an intervention to force me into medical care. How is that not treating me like someone who's helpless and incapable? Linda didn't have an answer for that question, because there wasn't one that didn't confirm what I just said. The problem, I continued, is that families often confuse caring about someone with controlling them. They think that love gives them the right to override someone's autonomy and make decisions for them. But we were trying to help you, she said. You were trying to help yourselves feel better about a situation that was making you uncomfortable, I corrected. You were trying to solve a problem that you perceived without caring about whether your solution was what I wanted or needed. How do we care about you without controlling you? You ask questions instead of making assumptions, I said. You offer support instead of taking over. You respect my choices even when you disagree with them. What if your choices seem dangerous or harmful? Then you express your concerns respectfully, you offer specific help, and you accept that I'm an adult who has the right to make my own decisions about my own life, I said. You don't try to override my judgment or take away my autonomy. But what if you're really making a mistake that could hurt you? Then I'll learn from that mistake? Just like I've been learning from mistakes for 74 years, I said. The possibility that I might make a bad decision doesn't give you the right to take away my ability to make any decisions. But here's where I needed to help Linda understand the most important lesson of all. The understanding that would determine whether our relationship could recover from this experience. Linda, I said, I need you to understand something about trust in family relationships. What's that? Trust isn't just about believing that someone loves you, I said. Trust is about believing that someone respects you enough to let you live your own life, make your own choices, and handle your own problems. I do respect you, she said. Do you? I asked. Because this morning you approached me with disgust and contempt. You told me I smell like death. You've been researching how to take away my legal rights. How is any of that respectful? I was worried and I didn't know how to handle it, she said. And that's exactly the problem, I said. When you don't know how to handle your worry, your instinct is to try to control the person you're worried about. Your instinct is to override their autonomy rather than support their decisions. How do I change that instinct? You start by remembering that the people you love are complete human beings with their own judgment, their own wisdom, and their own right to make choices about their own lives. Even when their choices worry you. Especially when their choices worry you, I said. Because that's when it's most important. Respect their autonomy and trust their judgment. But there was one more lesson Linda needed to learn. One more understanding that would complete her education about family relationships and respect. There's something else you need to understand about what happened here, I said. What's that? You need to understand that your reaction to my cancer treatment reveals something about your priorities and your values, I said. What do you mean? I mean that when you learned I'd been through cancer treatment, your first response wasn't relief that I was okay, or pride that I'd handled a difficult situation successfully, I said. Your first response was anger that I hadn't included you in my medical decisions. I was upset that you'd gone through something so serious alone, she said. You were upset that I'd made important decisions without consulting you, I corrected. You were upset that I'd exercised my autonomy in a way that didn't include your input or control. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain to me why you immediately started talking about how my medical decisions affected your life, I said. Explain to me why your first concern was about your right to be involved in my healthcare choices. She couldn't explain it, because there was no explanation that didn't confirm what I'd just said. Linda, I said, I want you to think about this very carefully. When someone you love is going through a difficult situation, what should your priority be? Supporting them, she said quietly. And what does support look like? Offering help without taking over, respecting their choices even if you disagree with them, being available without being controlling. That's exactly right, I said. And that's not what you did. What you did was try to take control of a situation that wasn't yours to control. I know, she said, tears flowing freely now. I know I handled this badly. I know I hurt you. I know I damaged our relationship. The question now, I said, is whether you've learned something from this experience that will change how you approach our relationship going forward. What do you want me to learn? I want you to learn that respect is more important than control, I said. I want you to learn that trust means believing in someone's judgment, even when you're worried about them. I want you to learn that love doesn't give you the right to override someone else's autonomy. And if I prove that I've learned those lessons, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect instead of your attempts to manage my life. How do I prove that I've learned? You start by changing how you communicate with me, I said. No more judgmental assessments of my appearance or my choices. No more assumptions about my capabilities or my needs. No more research into legal ways to override my autonomy. What should I do instead? You should treat me like the competent, autonomous adult that I am, I said. You should respect my privacy, trust my judgment, and support my choices even when they make you uncomfortable. And if I have concerns, you express them respectfully, once, and then you accept my response, I said. You don't keep pushing. You don't try to convince me that your judgment is better than mine. You don't threaten to take away my autonomy if I don't agree with your assessment. 6 weeks later, Linda and I were sitting in my garden, having what had become our new kind of conversation. Instead of her monitoring my behavior and making judgments about my capabilities, we were talking like two adults who respected each other's autonomy and wisdom. Mom, she said, I've been thinking a lot about what happened the day I told you that you smelled like death.
What have you been thinking about?
I've been thinking about how wrong I was about everything, she said. Not just about your medical situation, but about my whole approach to our relationship. What do you mean? I've been treating you like someone I needed to take care of instead of someone I could learn from, she said. I've been focusing on what I thought you needed instead of asking what you wanted. This was exactly the kind of self-reflection I'd been hoping for. The kind of honest assessment that suggested Linda was learning something meaningful from our difficult experience. And how has that realization changed your perspective? I asked. It's made me realize that I've been doing the same thing with Tom and the kids, she said. I've been trying to manage their lives instead of supporting their choices. I've been assuming that my worry gives me the right to control their decisions. This was an unexpected development. The lesson about respect and autonomy was extending beyond our relationship to Linda's other family relationships. How so? I've been criticizing Tom's career choices because they make me anxious about our financial security, she said. I've been overriding the kids' decisions about their activities and their friendships because I think I know what's best for them. And how is that working out? It's not, she admitted. Tom's been getting more and more frustrated with me, and the kids have been pulling away. I've been creating the same problems in my house that I created with you. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to start treating my family like people whose judgment I respect instead of people I need to manage, she said. I'm going to start offering support instead of trying to take control. But the most significant change was in how Linda approached our relationship specifically. Mom, she said, I want to ask you something about your cancer treatment. What about it? I want to know if there's anything I can do now to support your recovery, she said. Not because I think you can't handle it yourself, but because I'd like to be involved in your life in positive ways. What did you have in mind? Maybe I could drive you to your follow-up appointments, she said. Maybe I could help you research healthy diet options for cancer survivors. Maybe I could just spend more time with you, not to monitor your condition, but because I enjoy your company. This was exactly the kind of relationship I'd been hoping for, instead of trying to manage my medical care. Linda was asking how she could support my choices. Instead of treating me like a patient who needed supervision, she was treating me like a person whose company she valued. I'd like that, I said. But only if you're genuinely interested in spending time with me, not because you're trying to keep tabs on my health. I'm genuinely interested, she assured me. I realized during these past few weeks that I actually really enjoy talking with you. I enjoy hearing your perspectives on things. I enjoy learning from your experiences. What would you like to learn? I'd like to learn how you became so strong and independent, she said. I'd like to understand how you've maintained your dignity and your autonomy through all the challenges you've faced in your life. And I'd like to learn how to be a better mother to my own children, she added. How to support them without controlling them. How to love them without trying to manage their lives. But the most important conversation came when Linda asked me about the broader implications of what we'd learned from our experience. Mom, she said, do you think what happened between us is typical of how families treat elderly relatives? I think it's very common, I said. I think families often assume that aging automatically makes someone less capable of making good decisions. I think they confuse caring about someone with controlling them. How do we change that? We start by changing our own behavior, I said. We start by treating elderly people like competent adults whose judgment deserves respect. We start by offering support instead of trying to take control. What about other families? How do we help them understand these lessons? We share our story, I said. We talk openly about the mistakes we made and what we learned from them. We help other families understand the difference between helping someone and controlling them. Would you be willing to do that? I'd be very willing to do that, I said. Because I think there are a lot of families who are making the same mistakes we made. And they don't realize the damage they're causing to their relationships. And that's exactly what we did. Linda and I began speaking together at community centers and senior organizations about family relationships, aging, and the importance of maintaining dignity and autonomy as people get older. We talked about the dangers of assuming that elderly people are automatically incompetent or incapable of making good decisions. We talked about the difference between offering support and trying to take control. We talked about the importance of respecting people's privacy and trusting their judgment, even when their choices make us uncomfortable. But most importantly, we talked about the fact that reaching a certain age doesn't disqualify someone from making their own decisions about their own life. We talked about the fact that elderly people are complete human beings with wisdom, experience, and the same right to autonomy that younger people have. The most important thing we learned, Linda would tell audiences, is that love doesn't give you the right to control someone else's life. Love means respecting someone enough to let them make their own choices, even when those choices worry you. And the most important thing I learned, I would add, is that families can recover from serious mistakes if they're willing to acknowledge what they did wrong and commit to doing better going forward. Our talks were well received, and we heard from many families who said our story had helped them recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. We heard from elderly people who felt validated in their struggles to maintain their independence. And we heard from adult children who realized they needed to change their approach to their aging parents. But the most meaningful feedback came from Linda herself, 6 months after our difficult conversation about smelling like death. Mom, she said, I want to thank you for not giving up on our relationship. What do you mean? I mean that you could have written me off after the way I treated you, she said. You could have decided that I was too controlling and judgmental to have a healthy relationship with, but instead, you used our conflict as an opportunity to teach me something important. What did I teach you? You taught me that respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship, she said. You taught me that love without respect is actually a form of control. You taught me that trust means believing in someone's judgment, even when you're worried about them. And what are you going to do with those lessons? I'm going to spend the rest of my life treating the people I love like competent adults whose autonomy deserves respect, she said. I'm going to remember that caring about someone doesn't give me the right to control them. And I'm going to teach my children the same lessons, she added. I'm going to make sure they understand that elderly people are not burdens to be managed, but human beings to be valued and respected. And that, my dear listeners, is how a cruel comment about smelling like death became the foundation for rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. That's how a daughter's attempt to control her mother's medical decisions became a lesson in the importance of autonomy and dignity. That's how a family learned that the greatest gift you can give someone you love is not protection from their own choices, but respect for their right to make those choices. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this: never assume that someone's appearance or behavior gives you the right to judge their competence or override their autonomy. Never let your worry about someone become an excuse to control them. Never confuse love with the desire to manage someone else's life. Because sometimes the people who seem to be struggling are actually handling difficult situations with more strength and wisdom than you could imagine. Sometimes the people you think need your control actually need your respect and support. The next time you're tempted to tell someone they smell like death, ask yourself whether you're approaching them with love or with judgment. Ask yourself whether you're offering support or trying to take control. Ask yourself whether you're offering support or trying to take control. Because in the end, how we treat people when they're vulnerable reveals everything about our character and our values. And the greatest gift we can give to the people we love is not our management of their lives, but our respect for their dignity and our trust in their judgment. I have more stories to share about family, dignity, and the surprising ways that love can grow stronger when it's based on respect rather than control. So subscribe, share your thoughts, and remember, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their age, their health, or their circumstances. Because we're all going to be elderly someday, and the respect we show to elderly people today is the respect we can hope to receive when our time comes.